Very good afternoon to all of you. We have about 60 participants who have joined today. Out of, I believe, we're close to 70 plus afternoon time, and more effort is required, certainly. But I believe that those who have joined would be rewarded. All right, so we will continue our discussions on marketing communications. We are trying to understand advertising as a marketing communication tool and how do you really plan campaign using advertising. And we were trying to look at advertising planning process, how you can take various decisions of planning campaign using research. And we're trying to look at some of the case context. If you recall, we looked at Gillette Dry Idea story and how advertising campaign was planned and executed. We also looked at Mountain Dew in a completely different context or the category, and try to understand how decisions with respect to developing strategy execution and choosing the right creative was taken. And we were also trying to understand that through another story of Narrow Lag Paints. We will complete that story now, and we will look at some of the other aspects of advertising execution particularly. uh, Before we get into another set of decisions which are important for advertising campaign, which are media related decisions. So let's just first complete our story of Narrow Lag Paints, but just to kind of all right, I think uh, this is something that we already discussed. I think this is what, all right. So we were trying to look at various stages of advertising campaign planning, and one of the important areas in advertising campaign planning is the message evaluation. So we will first look at some of the conceptual issues, and then we will move further. Why do you do message evaluation research? You would have understood by now. Uh, the whole idea is that you're spending huge amount of money in media, and you have to be sure about the creative that you are taking to media, so that the whole money that you spend on media does not go down the waste in case if it does not do damage to your brand. So you have to be pretty sure about what you are saying, and hence the execution has to be aligned with the strategy. What you want to say is exactly what this creative option or execution that you have developed has to say, and hence you try to ascertain that through research. You go and ask consumer. What we have seen is that in Gillette, there is over reliance on copy testing or advertising pre-test or message evaluation research. In Mountain Dew, a product category where experience-based decision making is important, and there you look at how the strategy is and whether your execution is in line with strategy implementing that. So there are two multiple approaches. You may not always do message evaluation research, particularly if your product category is where the impact is not essentially measured by just in laboratory. There are larger trends and sort of cultural upsets that your campaign might do as mass media campaign, that often evaluation of ads within a small sample in a laboratory is undermined, and that's what Mountain Dew believed. Of course, they do a lot of research in developing strategy and execution, but the testing or evaluation is done based on the systematic judgment. But nevertheless, you have to ascertain whether what you are saying is exactly what your creative execution is, or what you want to say is what exactly your creative execution is saying. So what it does is that it tries to evaluate few things. One is that ability of creative to break the clutter, to what extent consumers are able to comprehend your message, and to what extent the creative is able to, the execution, the advertising is actually able to persuade people. You may also like to look at not just to decide whether the creative should be taken on air or not. It's not just go no go decision. You also can use this research to provide diagnostic inputs and to improve on your creative as well. So you can go back and re-edit your television commercial or by your print ads, and kind of make them more effective. Another issue when you look at Mountain Dew is you look at the Mountain Dew situation, you're trying to evaluate creative at much early phase. Whereas in Gillette, you try to get into the full production of creative and then try to evaluate. So there are several issues why sometimes you don't do message evaluation research and you rely on judgment. But many product category, many market situation, you do that. Sometimes the budget is also an issue. Of course, not in case of Mountain Dew. But traditional thumb rule is that in India, like if you have budget more upwards of 15 to 20 crores, you decide to go on advertising pre-test or message evaluation research. Alternatively, you rely on judgment and do that. This is a budgetary consideration. So let's just try to understand how do you really go about doing it. We have seen that in Gillette idea case, but to put things in perspective, there are two broad approaches to do that. One is in theater, other is in field. And as you could see in Gillette story, both these methods are used by Gillette. So Gillette has what is called Recall Plus, sourced from research agency called ASI. And they also are sourcing what is called in theater methodology to test advertising creative or pre-test, both from that, also from ASI. So you have two broad approaches. One is the in theater, or what is called laboratory testing or central location testing. What you see there on the slide is CLT, central location testing. What you try to do there is you call sample of respondents from the target audience who perhaps would be eventually be exposed to your campaign. But mind you, there's a sample research, so you call few of the sample people at a central location, like theater or laboratory, like your PGP auditorium, and you tell them that you're going to kind of show them a film or a television program or something like that. And then, like what happens in real television program or a film on television, you have commercial break. And you have these ads which are tested being run there. At the end of the program, you try to have systematic way to measure. So you have instrument which will measure. However, to simulate the reality completely and also provide control factors to really see the effects in an experiment, what you try to do is that you use what is called portfolio method, which means that you don't show only the ads which are being tested, but you show a portfolio of ads. Some of them are existing ads from the other brands or your own brands and things like that. And once you do that, at the end of the program, you try to measure recall, sales message recall, emotional responses, and interpretation, etc., etc. So that's sort what is called a laboratory or CLT or in theater. What we are also saying is that in theater test can happen at different levels in the creative development process. So, like for example, Mountain Dew, you saw storyboards. You can actually test storyboard instead of the fully finished commercial. And the reason why you may do that is the risk involved with the creative. For example, if you develop something like a cheetah or mock opera, or for that matter even narrow like Amitabh commercial, put it to test, and suppose if it fails the test, what will you do? Like Gillette has been doing, you'll have to junk the ad. And there are large number of ads that perhaps are not gone on ad because they failed, or for some reason brands decide not to take them on ad. In that case, you run the risk of losing significant amount of cost involved in producing the commercial. And if you have celebrities like Amitabh acting that, the costs are much higher. Of course, the cost of media is significantly higher, and hence, to avoid disaster, you will not take it on air. But the cost, if you have already produced the commercial, is going to be much higher, and you are running the risk. Why don't you test the concept much earlier, creative? And hence, many brands say that we don't want to raise the cost in production. Because if we shoot cheetah, we may have to even go to Africa and foreign location, and the cost could be humongous. And after that, if it doesn't work, we'll have to reject it. So what they do is that they quite often try to test the creatives at early stage before the film is shot or edited. So sometimes you find, and that's quite often roughs, or right from a concept to storyboards. Sometimes storyboards are tested among the consumers in a way where the way I told. So you narrate the storyboard and ask consumer to figure out how they react and respond. Again, you may have portfolio to kind of test from. You may also do what are called animatics, which is animated film. You have not yet hired Amitabh, but you kind of show his cartoon and try to tell consumer this is how the commercial is going to come, and then you try to measure. Of course, it becomes a little difficult to test it against the other control ads, but you have fair idea. The third stage perhaps is you go one step further and try to do what is called photomatics. You have seen the commercial which is tested so far as Ames advertising is concerned, as against Never Never in Gillette Idea case. And you would know that the Ames executions were not exactly fully finished commercial. They were more of a photomatics, which means you have the music that you want to have, but instead of shooting film, you only have the pictures, illustrative pictures, which actually kind of capture the visuals that you're going to have later. So you are saving cost of. Sometimes you do shoot a film and you kind of without spending much effort in editing the film, because quite a lot of magic happens in editing itself. So rough edits are also kind of tested after shooting the film. So what we are trying to say is that there's a trade-off between the risk on the production cost that you are taking, and also at the same time the validity and reliability of your results. Because if you are going to test storyboard as against fully produced commercial, obviously the score may not be valid when the final commercial comes. So when you do fully produced commercial and put it under testing, you are almost simulating reality. But at any stage preceding that, it may not be the real commercial, and hence the impact may not be judged. It has to be, results have to be interpreted according. But it is a trade-off that you have to decide, but you have that choice. The other issue is that what happens with the print campaign, print advertisements. In the print, what you try to do is that you try to look at, because people have time, they look at the ad and sort of pay attention to various elements in the ad. And hence, you are concerned with which element people are more focusing on, how much time they are spending, what is the, flow order in which they move. Do they look at the headline first, then the visual, and then the pack shot, or they look at the pack shot first, then headline, and then the copy and things like that. So you actually have to decide that, what is the order. Sometimes you find that the pack shot or the logo is not even noticed by the consumer, you have a serious problem. Like you see the print advertisement that we're looking at of Narrow, like, you have huge, larger than the life picture of Amitabh, and people just notice that, look at the headline, and then, don't look at anything else, you have a problem. So you have to kind of measure whether people pay attention to the important element that you think is important for the performance or effectiveness of advertising. So what you try to do is that you try to, apply some of the tests. One of them is what is called readability test. And of course, as the name suggests, the whole idea is you try to look at whether people read your copy particularly, because increasingly people are spending less time in reading the text. Earlier times there was a lot of, and that's why it was called copy testing, because there's a lot of text inside the ad. Today you have most of the ads are significantly visual, you have few words there. But if you have copy, you have to measure whether people are going to read it or not. And readability quite often is measured through very different factors. One of them is what is called Fletcher's formula, which essentially tries to look at the number of syllables in a sentence. And the formula is that, if you have more than 8 syllables, people would not read that sentence or will not be able to comprehend. So likewise, you have several tests to look at that. One of them also is a methodology or a technique which is more technology driven by, which is called eye tracking, or what is called gaze motion. So you have cameras which actually measure the direction and the movement of your gaze, of your eyes. It is also called eye tracking because your eyes are being tracked. And that perhaps will tell you that, how much. And you also have what is called pupil dilation measure. So how much amount of focus people are doing, or what level of excitement is seen in their eyes, etc. So you have various physiological measures measured. One of them is eye tracking methodology, which is used for print creative evaluation, as well as in today's context, a lot of digital web page. For example, if you have to look at which is a good place, are people looking at the banners on the top or on the side or in the middle? How much time do they spend on banner versus the content of the page, etc., etc. So do they look at the content first and then banner? Do they look at the banner first? Many things. So website, how you do, people are looking at various elements. So gaze motion cameras and eye tracking is becoming popular. You have agencies who are specializing in that. I'm not fully aware of who's this Majestic cameras. I just received an email one day, so I thought of sharing with you. But a lot of agencies who are now into this physiological measures. So rather than measuring the response, which is actually behavioral response, I mean, this is more coming from the physiology rather than measuring verbal response in a question answer interview format. You try to see how the people's body react, and that might give you a better idea because there are less biases there. So your body doesn't lie. You might lie. There are biases in your responses. So what you do there is, you use wearable devices. Today you have many of them. Some of them follow this galvanometer kind of approach, which try to measure the potential difference of the smallest level and deflect. So you have more perspiration happening. It will kind of deflect. And it will indicate that at what level consumers are getting excited, or they are getting anxious, or perspiring and things like that. Likewise, even have some more sophisticated methodology like brain mapping, right? So EEG and stuff like that. Actually trying to look at what is the blood flow in your head, right? The blood flow I think is important. But when you have this brain mapping and you try to look at which side of the blood flows, it would indicate that how people are responding. So you have left side drained, right side drained, and obviously depending upon which side the blood is rushing, you can figure out how much blood is rushing, how much time it stays there, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to say is that one is these are all laboratory approaches that we're talking about. But the other approach is what is called field research, and there you actually run your commercials on real media, which is actually a kind of sometimes dummy vehicles. This dummy in the sense, not dummy, these are real channels and real shows. In real life you run the commercial on, but it is only for one or two spots that you run. I mean, only one or two programs you run your commercial, and then try to measure its effectiveness within 24 hours of it coming there. So you don't run a full campaign for the entire period of the campaign, nor you use very expensive channel. You try to take channels which are less expensive for the testing purpose. But you, instead of laboratory, you actually are running it on a on air program, and within 24 hours you go to the audiences, screen them for confirming that they have watched the program on which your ad had come, and then you try to figure out whether they are able to recall your brand, recall your advertising. If they recall your advertising, what all things they saw and things like that. So you have field study which is called day after recall. You have seen that in Recall Plus, that is used by ASI in Dry Idea. That methodology is day after recall methodology, if you have read the methodology note carefully. And they also use in theater test, as we're talking about. Sometimes you use what is called consumer juries, where you call consumers, and share your advertisements. Either ask them to watch the commercials together, or if you're a print ad, you show them various executions, and then let them have discussion and arrive at the judgment, which collectively they decide that this is a better ad, and their priorities and why they think so. And that again is like a consumer testing of your creative. The message evaluation research is a popular one. Many organizations do, like what you saw in Gillette. And you have research agencies who specialize in, and they have what are called off-the-shelf proprietary tools. So you just have to, as a brand manager, you can engage any of these research agency, and they have very evolved, tried and tested practices of doing message evaluation or copy testing. And since they do this for several brands, even in that product category, they'll be able to provide you what is called norms or benchmark data to help you take decisions on whether your creative is passing the test, is it worth taking on air, etc. So you have, for example, ASI is one of the research agencies who are popularly known for advertising research. And then you have what is called Millward Brown, which is also known for its advertising research focus. But you also have mainstream research agency like Nielsen and TNS. They have their tools. So ASI is what is called Recall Plus, Millward Brown is what is called Link, Nielsen is Advantage, TNS is Adival. So likewise, different research agencies can help you find the right sort of evaluation procedure which can do that and provide you benchmark data also. But you should be aware about when to test it, where to test it, and what kind of methodology do they have in theater, central location, or are they doing field, and what kind of metrics they are providing, what kind of measures they are providing, etc., etc. At the end of it, what you're looking for is how consumer perceive, what is the noticeability, awareness, etc., comprehension, and also reaction in terms of the emotional responses that are generated, like audience reward that we talk. So you try to look at all these aspects, and the whole idea here is to prevent disaster, because you are risking so much of media money on this creative. It better say what it's supposed to say, otherwise it does not go on air. So you are trying to reduce the uncertainty of your advertising failing by ensuring that the execution meets the strategy. Now, if we look at that, Narrowlack, had identified this issue in 2003-2004 campaign, that they have to have top of mind awareness. They also have to have a focus on building image, which is having leadership aura for Narrowlack brand. And they say that they can do that because they had the industrial segment leadership. So you exploit. And we also saw that they later developed a campaign using that strategy with Amitabh to increase top of mind awareness and also provide leadership aura. And the message was trying to bring in the industrial segment leadership and, kind of telling consumer that we are everywhere. This is the color that touches you even without you're realizing it. Now, having developed this campaign, the question then comes: is, did they subject to copy test or advertising pre-testing? Yes, they did, and they actually did field pre-test, like Recall Plus, as we talked about, with about 100 people as sample in Mumbai and Delhi. So instead of the mainstream Hindi GEC where they would run their media campaign later, for the test they chose a low-cost channel which was local to Mumbai or largely in Maharashtra, called Star Pravah, which is a Marathi channel for within the Star group of channels. So they advertised that as a dummy vehicle. In Delhi, they used a cable channel local to advertise. And then within 24 hours, they, which is called DAR research or day after recall method, they went to the consumers and, kind of did this testing. And what were the findings? Obviously, they try to figure out that people are watching what kind of programs and shows. Not just that. What was important is which all ads they could recall, which all brands ads they saw yesterday night. This is a day after recall test. And you see that about Narrowlack is recalled significantly compared. Of course, the first brand recall were some other brands, but Narrowlack brand was also recalled. Not just that, within paint category, which brand advertisement did you see? So there also Narrowlack is doing better. Which all ads you saw with Amitabh ad, and you had almost significantly high recall rates, which means that people could identify and associate this ad with Narrowlack brand. The total recall scores were high that they had seen Narrowlack ad, whether Amitabh ad or any other kind of Narrowlack ad. But 90 to 94% people had seen Narrowlack ad, so they could recall which elements of the ad were recalled. And as you could see, the biggest element that was memorable or impactful in the communication was Amitabh. So large number of people could record. Hands getting colored was another element. Ladies' hands getting folded hand. I mean, that was a slightly interesting one. So that was also high score. But some of the elements had lower score compared to them. But I think most of the elements were recalled. Did people, see the ad and could narrate the storyline? Yes, close to 40 plus percentage people in Mumbai and Delhi could do that. Did they get the message? Mixed result. Delhi people did not get the message, because they say Narrowlack is a good paint is what the ad is saying. Where the ad was talking about, there is a color that touches everybody's like. So Mumbai is a little closer. Narrowlack is present everywhere. 30% people said so. So you try to assess, to what extent people are comprehending your ad. And then you try to make interpretation and conclusion like what we went through in Gillette Idea case. So in this particular case, the brand group said that yes, these are not bad results. Amitabh is not dominating the ads. Other elements are getting recalled. We have significant recall. The ad is breaking the clutter. etc. Among the ads in, this is number 2 in terms of recall yesterday. So they found that it's worth taking on ad. So they decided to run it, in the real campaign. So once the campaign starts, obviously, if it's a quarterly campaign or half yearly or annual campaign, you have uh, certain important things tracked, and these are all brand related, brand response, communication response, or communication effect related measures on the brand. So to what extent people are aware, to what extent they have interest, what extent they are desirous of preference, what extent they have bought this particular brand. So this whole response hierarchy that we talk about, you try to measure that, how this ad is impacted on all these effects on the audiences at the end of the campaign period, and that is what is called campaign evaluation research as against message evaluation. So that is pre-test, which means before you take it to the media, before you run the campaign, you're pre-testing it, also called copy testing. But here you are testing the advertising and finally evaluating its effectiveness in real life. So campaign evaluation research is also called tracking research, because the same measures you track every quarter or every year and try to interpret whether a particular campaign run in that particular period has made an impact on those parameters. So obviously the answer that you are trying to seek here is that how have we fared at the marketplace with this kind of campaign. And obviously you try to measure the advertising related measures, but more importantly you track the brand effects, parameters. So communication effects parameters like awareness, interest, desire, and action. So obviously try to know whether the scores on leadership have gone up at the end of narrow lag campaign, or you try to look at whether top of mind recall has gone up, because these were the objectives. Sometimes you try to look at and in order to measure the very specific campaigns effectiveness, isolating media spend, because it's quite possible that in tracking research you had measured the same parameter last quarter where the media spend was about 50 crore. This quarter you are kind of measuring the same thing and trying to look at that how the change has taken place, but your media spend in last quarter was 15 crores. So you can't compare those metrics with this metrics, because your media spend vary, and media spend actually influences awareness, interest, desire, and action. So what you do is that you try to look at advertising awareness or brand awareness with respect to media awareness. And hence you take a ratio that for every, and the idea is that every $100 you spend, what is the level of awareness that you've been able to create. So you are actually isolating the absolute volume of the media that you are looking at. You may also try to look at that for the kind of ad awareness, how much is the brand awareness, and for the brand awareness, how much is that. So basically when you look at this ratio, you are able to isolate the advertising campaigns effect, minus the media spend, minus the other elements that have contributed to the brand awareness. So you look at these measures and like you have advertising pre-test that you can buy off the shelf from the research agency, this brand track is also available. So Millward Brown, you have IMRB, you have Nielsen, you have TNS. They have brand track methodologies and processes who can deploy it readily, for your brand as well. And then of course for the sales, you have to rely on the consumer panels and household panels and the retail audit data, which provide you sales volume, value, market share happening at the retailer level. So coming back to the Nerolac story, did they do campaign evaluation research at the end of the campaign? Definitely they did that. So in those days, Millward Brown and IMRB were partners in India. Millward Brown was entering in India, and they had entered, I think, maybe they were not allowed to have more stake or principal ownership. So they had tied up with Indian partner. now, of course, Millward Brown is on his own, and they must be having significant majority stake, and hence they are called Millward Brown, not IMRB Millward Brown. But anyway, so what we are saying is that this track was, from this in those days IMRB Millward Brown, which Narrow Paints was using, and the quarter one, findings, which was presented, looked something like this. So they had, run a campaign from 1st October to 27 December was what the campaign period, and they presented the results in January. So what you see here is that about 1,300 people were used as sample in this research, across about 6-7 cities, as you can see. And of course, they were representative of the target segment that they were looking at. And you ask this question to measure awareness as to when you think of paints, which brand comes to your mind? And top of the mind refers to the first brand that comes to the mind. And you see the numbers here. So Asian Paints close to 63%, Narrow about 20%, likewise. And different cities, you have different kind of awareness. Similarly, you have spontaneous awareness. And this is not the top of the mind, but this is unprompted, unaided recall. What is the level of awareness? Very close, 90-98%. What the conclusion was that, certainly the recall scores have gone up, top of the mind recall still not as high. And hence they should continue doing more campaign to build top of the mind awareness. And they concluded that the Amitabh Bachchan campaign has contributed in building this kind of recall scores and saliency of the brand at much lesser. But they also observed that, you had some missing link here, because unlike what you saw in message evaluation research, in this particular case, Amitabh was recalled by very high number of people, but the Narrow brand was recalled by very few people. So you had some mismatch, and of course, that was what some big worry that they had. But what they concluded is that it has worked to some extent, but there are mixed results, and you cannot say that it has worked to the expectation that they had. What we are trying to say is that yes, what we have seen is several campaigns with significant amount of research is done to take decision at different stages of the campaign. And research sometimes may not give you 100% answers, but it certainly reduces uncertainty. It reduces the risk, and it improves the chances of your being right. Of course, there's no guarantee that you would always be right if you do research, and because the research itself has a lot of biases. But it's important that when you have huge amount of money at stake, you don't want to have big chances of failure. You may have small chances of failure. So it's very, very important to do, advertising research different stages and take decision up. So now we have pretty good idea about, advertising campaign planning process. But what is important also is to understand certain conceptual framework that, of course, you understand consumers, to develop strategy. You understand consumers to understand their culture, and hence, do encoding and packaging and creative execution. You understand consumer to understand whether they have understood your advertising. And then finally, you said, what is the impact on the consumers about that? So you do a lot of consumer research to take decision. But, having got these insights and understanding, you should be in a position to decide certain way of, doing things. Say, for example, what would you tell consumers? That perhaps quite often is the focus from the brand side. But you also have creative execution. So what we are saying is that, I think, where is my, just give me a second. I think I opened a different presentation. All right. So what I was trying to say is that ultimately, when you do advertising campaign planning, you have to take decisions with respect to advertising message strategy. Two important things that we talk about: one is what is the message, other is the execution. And quite often, message is the focus from the brand group side. The execution is largely territory of advertising agency. However, both message and execution go hand in hand as we're looking at. And ideally, both brand group and agency should co-own the entire campaign. And hence it is important not just to focus on what should you say, which is the brand's positioning, the benefits and all that. The brand group would have certainly major say in that based on the consumer research. But how do you really execute also requires to be understood. And there are two important areas to focus there when you look at advertising execution. One is the source of the message, and the other is the structure or the style or the format in which the execution is generally, how the message is said. And all this, entire advertising message strategy, what do you say and how do you say, based on the research, the planning department within the advertising agency shares it with the creative department to finally develop the execution. And this strategy is called creative brief or creative strategy or copy strategy, as it is said in dry idea. So let's just look at, the source related issues, who says the message in a campaign is very important. For example, we have seen that in Gillette case, the sources, were different. For example, spokesman ad, if you look at, you had a model who was endorsing, but you also had Never Never campaign where you had a mini celebrity called television actor trying to kind of say the message. You also had, some commercials where common people were used, to convey the message. Likewise, you see that in several brands across categories, they use variety of different people to say the message. Sometimes they use celebrity. We have seen that in Narolak, Amitabh is used. At times they also use employees. Not many brands use employee, but sometimes in business markets or in corporate campaign, employees are more popularly used, where you use your R&D expert to come in the commercial and talk about how carefully he designed and what is the performance and all. But in consumer market, you don't find too many occasions where employees are used. Like for example, sometimes you have I was just mentioning to other class, there was this Trivago campaign. I think a couple of years back they were bombarding on all television channels, a startup, meta search engine for flight booking and or hospital, I think hotel book. And you had the model in that ad actually who was a founder of the startup Trivago. So you have, at times, employee coming. I don't know whether he was trying to sort of save money on models, but you look like he had a lot of money from VC and all that. But you may have employee. You have another, like recently this old man died. I don't know whether you are aware, but there's this Masala King from Delhi who came from Pakistan after partition, and build a brand, by modeling himself in the television commercials. MDH, Mirchi Dhania Haldi Masala. And last month was like completely dedicated to him in some sense, with a lot of spots on Star Plus and other entertainment channel, bombarded to the audiences. So you have employees coming into the campaign at times, not so often consumer market, but you have a lot of common people, act as source of message for several brands. So whether you see Harpic or Ariel or Colgate, Vedashakti, and many brands, you find the common people used. And even if their models used, they are shown as common people. So common man, could be another source of message. Sometimes you use spokes characters. Now these are not human beings, but you have some characters created. You have 7-Up had one popular character called Fido. You have Sunfist, who have a character created of Sun. You have Pillsbury, they have Doughboy. You have the biggest example that we can talk about in Indian context is a spokes character based campaign done by Vodafone, very successful campaign called Zuzu. Zuzu campaigns, I'm sure many of you would have seen. So you have a brand sometimes rely on the spokes character because they have more controlled image of the source, and they can throw in the attribute that they want in those characters. So if they want to look a character like more expert fellow, they will show Mr. Fix-It, who has a helmet and all that. So he's like a construction champion. He's a character that you have created. So what I'm trying to say is that brands create these archetypes and characters, and sometimes they act as source, and sometimes you have experts who have established credentials in the product category. The most common type of experts that are used in packaged consumer goods business are the chefs, celebrity chefs. And chefs are master chefs, and they are experts in cooking. So when they vouch for an edible oil or or her dal or something like that, as to how easy to cook that, and how well cooked that dal becomes, or how this edible oil is frying nicely, it tastes good but doesn't have too much oily filling. So you have experts like Sanjeev Kapoor, the grand old chef of Indian television. But you have a lot of new chefs, which this Master Chef, India program has created, like Pankaj, who appears in Nor Soup commercials. You have Vikas Khanna and few others, appearing in some other brands. But you need not have experts only in the chefs. So you have experts like dentists, for example, toothpaste brand like Sensodyne. They use experts. They show dentists in that, and that way even Colgate shows dentists in their commercial often. But one important piece of trivia for people who don't know is that in India, doctors are not allowed to. They are experts on many of this proprietary medicine and all that. Uh, you know, but they're not allowed, to do commercial modeling or something like that. But since Sensodyne commercials are shot with the dentist, British dentist of Indian origin, they can actually, they don't they are they're immune of Indian law perhaps. So Glaxo being a British sort of company, they can they took the British dentist of Indian origin to, kind of appeal to the Indian audience and, show it. But yeah, you can show experts. I don't know whether you want to call Baba Ramdev as an expert, but he is an expert in yoga, perhaps, the way he moves his belly, and hence, of course, people would, find it believable. So when you look at this character, the question then comes is that, whether you use Baba is an employee. I don't know whether he's an employee or owner. I mean, would you like to call it, but he also qualifies for experts. So you have various choices of, sources who will tell the message. But you also have to look at that how would you use this source. We will come to that question that when do you use what kind of source. But important issue is also, the source will be used in what way. Would you use, the source as endorser, which is like a spokesman ad, the person comes, endorsement is, given by most of the many advertisement, you will find that the model or the, person comes or the source comes and tries to, talk about the brand's benefit and explain you and, try to sell you that this brand is better, it can solve your problem, this got so many benefits, things like that. Now that is endorsement. It's directly selling, it's a representative of the brand. But he can also be kind of coming as more authentic at times if the source is coming and saying that I have used this particular product, I have tried it, it has given me benefit, and hence you try. So Amitabh comes in several ads, but not all ads, or many ads he says that I am using it, but he's just endorsing it. He's explaining the benefit, and you perhaps would buy it. But there are certain commercials where the celebrities come and endorse, not just endorse, they testify. So they're identified. So Deepika Padukone comes in Lux commercial. She's bathing in that quintessential white bathtub of Lux. And then, but she's identified as she's bathing, that she's Deepika. She's actor, not just by name and profession. And then, Deepika comes and talks to the camera and says that, Meri sundarta ka raz Lux hai, or something like that. So the secret of my beauty is Lux. And of course, she's shown, bathing literally with, the Lux soap. So that is a testimonial kind of advertisement. You can use common people like, Ariel, Veda Shakti, Colgate, Harpic, several ads. You find common people identified by their name and profession or location. And then they come on camera and say that, I have used this Veda Shakti and it is giving me great feeling and, my teeth are intact and all that. So they explain the benefit based on their experience. They testify that they have tried and it's good, more credible. Sometimes you use source not actually directly selling you the product. It's an indirect use of source. And what they are doing in the advertisement or the commercial is that they are acting. What they do is that they are actually taking the roles of the consumers and, act out the real situation from the real life of the consumers. And where, of course, there are lots of problems and how the brand come across the problems. So through role play, they demonstrate that the brand actually works in those situations and the consumer should use it. The source actually is used as actor. So they act out. Whether they're celebrity or whether Thanda matlab Coca-Cola, Amir Khan, is not coming and saying that, you buy this Coca-Cola, but he's acting out and different kind of avatars and all. So what we are trying to say is that the source could be many and how you use them also could be direct or indirect. What we are further saying is that, when you decide which source to use, you have to look at Herbert Kellman's model, which actually says that the source can bring 3 possible alternative value to the table in a communication. One of them is credibility. So if your brand is in a situation where the communication, required to be done by that brand requires credibility, then you use a source which brings that, because the source can bring credibility. Whoever tells the message, if the person is believable, the story of the brand or the benefits of the brand become believable. The communication believable, and communication ends up persuading consumers. So what kind of so what we are seeing in the brand situation, like for example, we talk about Narolac. Narolac is a paint brand which operates in a paints category where trust becomes an important factor. And that's what we're saying, that the research indicated the consumers are looking for trustworthiness. And they think that leader brands are trustworthy. That's a different matter, but trust is important. And hence credibility becomes important. More so in case of Narolac campaign that we're talking about, they wanted to claim leadership when they are not the leader in decorative paints market, because they wanted to exploit industrial paint leadership. It was difficult for them to persuade consumers. Consumers would not believe unless you have some credible mechanism to tell that story. So you had challenges both from the point of view of what the campaign was trying to do, as well as in general consumers' behavior with respect to that product category. And hence credibility was important. Now you might say that, why Amitabh is credible. The credibility can actually have two dimensions. One is what is called expertise. Expert people, are supposed to be credible with respect to the product category. So when Sanjeev Kapoor or Vikas Khanna or any other celebrity chef says that this product is good, and you can make fantastic crispy kachoris or whatever, or samosa, whatever. So then perhaps, of course, people will believe that this is going to kind of create hotel kind of Chinese or whatever. So you have chef talking about, expert talking. But now you might say that expert can provide credibility. But what about Narolac? Amitabh is not expert, but the credibility was still an issue. Then how come Amitabh be? He's not a paint. He's not a chemical engineer. He's not an R&D expert in paints business. How can he be credible? So there is another dimension of credibility, which is trustworthiness, and that depends on the person's honesty and to what extent he is perceived to be ethical and believable. Now, fortunately for Amitabh, today he's in a situation where he is reasonably more credible compared to the rest of the celebrities in India. Of course, once upon a time his name was in Bofors, but it's cleared now. Panama files, I think he's still there, but otherwise a nice, honest fellow. People believe him. So, which means that people will, say that, okay, if, Amitabh is, generally he would not lie. He's an ethical guy. So if he says Narolac is a leader brand or hum keh rahe hain, then we would believe. So if you look at what actually, how consumers get persuaded here, they get persuaded through a process called internalization. They would internalize what the source will say without argument, right? They would just internalize it. Okay, the source, isne bola he is expert, then I will believe it. I don't have to kind of argue or go into detail also to find out as to why it is. It's like you have, Corona is now kind of in a very sort of alarming, kind of situation, March, April, you have very serious situation. I mean, people are scary. And then, you have our, 30-minute commercial coming on national television in a kind of all channel, what do you call your roadblock situation, all the channels, you have one person talking about. The source of the message is Prime Minister of the country. And he says that, tomorrow evening, you do Ganti and, we'll be able to, save ourselves from Corona. Now you don't argue. I mean, the country actually, gets into that, business of doing it. I'm not kind of implying anything else. He had a different objective and agenda to, kind of prepare nation and the people and, kind of charge them against this crisis. But what I'm trying to say is that, he is a trustworthy fellow for millions of Indians, though many people may not like. So people believe in him. Modi says, "To mumkin hai kuch bhi." We will do anything. So that's the whole, story here. The internalization, no argument. Source says this, he's a trustworthy, believable. We believe it. So because he's generally, kind of well-intentioned, good prime minister. So that's what, you look at. The credibility can come either because of expert. He's not a, corona expert or this one that, or any kind of, like Baba also can, say that, Kanti can remove. But, people would believe that he's generally a trustworthy guy. So if he's saying, obviously he's saying it for reason, and we don't argue with. So credibility, is something that happens, because of source value, and source can bring that value. And if the source brings credibility to the campaign, then the persuasion can happen through internalization. However, in every situation that brand is in, you don't require emphasis on credible communication, because sometimes, people believe you, I mean, you are not talking about something unbelievable. What is important is that people should be able to like you. It's not that people don't have trust in whatever. They should, you have to tell them in a way which they identify with. It should resonate with. And hence, people would like to look for attractiveness. So the other, attribute that a source can be considered for, or considered to bring to the table, is attractiveness. So in many brand situation, they don't look for source which bring credibility. I mean, if this is credible, it is good, but more importantly, they are looking at an attribute in the source which is attractiveness, because they know that the consumers quite often end up buying, they get persuaded through a process called identification as against internalization, which means if they identify with the source, they end up buying what he says. They get persuaded, they change their opinion. So you have to understand that, which kind of source bring attractiveness to the table. Now there are three dimensions of attractiveness. So if the source is supposed to bring any one of them, it's an attractive source. One of the dimensions of attractiveness is similarity. People, as I told you, the persuasion process here is identification, which means that, people identify with the source, then they will change their behavior and opinion and attitude. And hence, if the source is similar, they identify with. Say for example, if I'm a housewife and I'm trying to, I'm kind of worried about, the sort of stains in the toilet, and I'm concerned as to how to clean this toilet, and you wonder who does every morning. But it's only you, and you have that stain. But then you say, okay, fine, that lady in the television looks like me. She's a real housewife in Pune. She's using Harpic. It works for him. Let me try that out. So what actually happens, you identify with the source because the source is similar. The common people is an example of attractiveness in some sense, because they bring similarity. But it's not always similarity that brings attractiveness. You may have familiarity, popularity. I can identify a person just by looking at it, because Virat Kohli, anybody can just look at it, right? Everywhere he is. Amitabh Bachchan, I see it, identify. So identification can happen even in a familiar or popular, and hence that source is also attractive. Celebrities. The attractiveness dimension in celebrities is familiarity. They're not attractive because they're absolutely attractive. You might have Irfan Khan doing a lot of endorsement. Unfortunately, he's no more, but you have people like that who may not be conventionally beautiful, but they are popular people, right? And people identify with them. they identify them and they identify with them in an aspirational way, and they are attractive. So the communication becomes light, identification, the persuasion takes. And finally, the sheer absolute beauty in its, sort of mathematical sense. So there are certain models, human beings who are having that, the golden ratios in their body and, faces and all that. So they're beautiful. And they're decorative models. So you have, I don't know, you know better, but Kiara Advani, I think. I don't know whether you can. Lisa Hayden. There are models which are now popularly used as decorative models of many brands, and they can bring attractiveness. So the what we are saying is that when you choose a source, you choose him for credibility, and see whether if that is something that you require. If credibility is not something important for the campaign that you are doing, you may examine, the attractiveness is important, and you may like to use source which is attractive, which is identified. And finally, you also have another important characteristics or value that the source can bring, which is what is called power. The persuasion can happen through internalization. It can happen through identification, as we saw. But it can also happen without any of this through compliance, which means if you have somebody who says that this is the rule and he is perceived to be a powerful person, if you don't do that, he can control you. He has the ability to punish or reward. Then even if you don't believe, no credibility, you don't like him, but still the behavior changes. You might end up buying a product because there's power. Power comes by, perceived control. If the audience perceives that this source can punish you or reward you, right, then perhaps compliance happens and the behavior change happens. Attitude change may happen, at least temporarily, in favor of the brand, and people may end up buying. Now, whether you like or not, you have to attend the classes of this particular course, because I say so, and I'm a powerful source because I can control your grades. So that's one way to understand, how power actually can change behavior or influence behavior. The power is not only about perceived control or ability to punish or reward. It can happen because of perceived concern. Like if you look at my position, it is not because of the control I might insist that, you should kind of be part of this class, but it could be out of concern, right? So many times, your dad says that beta shadi kar le, right? And then you might end up getting married, whether you don't believe, I mean, you don't believe, perhaps you don't want to do it, but you comply. You are not persuaded because, you had great reason to believe in wedding marriage at that point. But daddy said, and daddy is not, you are 24-year-old. So daddy is not going to kind of punish you or reward you. But importantly, you believe that he has concern, maybe, is right, and you comply. So you have perceived concern, sometimes, lending power to the source. Or sometimes the source can become powerful if the source has what is called perceived scrutiny, or, or is believed to be or perceived to have can scrutinize your behavior. And that actually happens when the source is quite close to you. So many times when you talk about compliance and power, we are talking about personal communication, interpersonal communication. We're not talking about mass media. Mass media communication quite often, like Narendra Modi coming on television and saying that, you do this diya jalao or ganti and all that, and entire country actually doing that, large number of that, is not because of compliance. He's a prime minister, he has a lot of power in that sense because in a powerful political position. But it is not because of power people. There it is worked because of internalization, because of mass media communication. But in interpersonal communication, the personal communication, personal selling, if you talk about, power plays significant role. So same, Mr. Narendra Modi's office, if later is issued to all IIMs, the temples of intellectualism, would not be actually arguing anything. Even if they don't believe, they will comply because of power that we're talking about. And there is an ability to scrutinize the action also, in public institution by the government. So where there is, even in other context, if you look at your friend next door in your hostel room, is advise you something, you don't comply, you end up buying something else, some other mobile phone than what he had suggested. You would hide from him at least for few days after purchase, because you did not comply to his suggestion. And there is a power, because of course power in the sense is not rewarding, it is scrutinize. He can scrutinize. Arey yaar, I told you ye Samsung third rate phone hai, wahi kharid ke aa gaya tha. So that is essentially is what perceived scrutiny, which in some sense gives us. So many times in personal selling, the sales executives are trained to improve on this dimension, and to what extent they can they can give discount. There is a ability to punish or reward a consumer, right? They are shown to be perceived concern, they become family person, insurance agents, how pally they get to your spouses and try to tell them that, look what happens to you if your husband dies or your wife dies or child dies, and try to say. So they are trained to kind of leverage this dimension and increase their power. So the compliance happens, the brand gets purchased. So what we are trying to say in communications, source plays significant role, and in different situation which the brand operates, you have to decide what is an important issue of that attribute of the source that you want to leverage. How do you want to do persuasion in that? Obviously, the consumer research will tell you how consumers behave, and you know whether internalization is working or identification is working, compliance would work. And then you use appropriate source, leverage those attributes, and you will have more effective campaign. We take a break now. I think it's 4:13 in my uh, clock, so I think we'll try to meet at 4:20. Is that fair? No, not. I think that's a little 4:25. I think that's about 12-15 minutes time. So 4:25 we'll meet again. Thank you. And that time, if you have any questions, you can raise that before we go further.